Hello and welcome to this video. Here we'll do a quick overview of the plugin. First of all, let's make sure that we have our plugin enabled. Depending on whether you have it as a engine plugin or as a project plugin is where you'll have to take a look. For this test project, I have it as part of a project plugin, so I'll be doing my setup from over here. To set this up, you want to make sure that it's enabled. The first time you enable it, it'll ask you to restart, and then go ahead and do that. Next, we want to make sure that we can see our content, so you go to View Options, and then you select which option applies to you. If the plugin is installed at the engine level, make sure to show engine content to show it. Okay, so now that we're here, we're going to showcase how would I set this up in my own project with my own settings and with my own elements. So and I'm going to be implementing this inside my little test folder here, and then we'll take it from there. Alright, so project settings. I won't go into this in detail here. There's been documents and videos outlining these in the past. I'm just going to over, if I understood what the system was doing, how would I set this up? Alright, so first you see that we have our data options, data table. So I'm going to go over here and I'm going to copy this just to have something to start with, and then I'm going to rename it just so that I can differentiate it, and it's going to be called test. Okay, and then here, that's that, and that's beautiful. Okay, so in my test, I am going to be doing a couple of things. So first of all, I want the names to be a little bit different. I'm not going to be using the ones that are current, so let's take a look at how that would look. So first, what you want to do is, you might get a little bit confused when it comes to the row name and the key entry. The system uses the name input at the entry level. So in that sense, the names of your data table rows are relatively irrelevant. If you want to modify them as well to, keep a sense of everything in the configuration level, you're welcome to, but please keep in mind that the value that matters is the one inside here. And as in the docs, the key value here determines whether it's a standard profile, which means that you can't modify the individual parameters, whether it's custom, which means that you can modify the individual parameters here, but it depends on which settings you might have blocked here. So, in this case, maybe in economy, I don't want my textures to be able to be set on epic, right? So that would mean that if this was a custom profile, I would not be able to set, textures to epic. So just to give you an idea in terms of how you can use that framework. Okay, so I'm going to be renaming this a little bit, and for now, let's call them in terms of rank. So, let's say that I'm going to be calling this an E rank, so that it's the lowest. Then, we're going to go here for a D rank, and then here we are going to head over and then rename this to a C rank, and then a B rank, A rank, and then here we're going to be having an S rank, and then here for now let's just call this wizard. Okay, so then we have this here, and then that means that we have now set the names of the profiles that we want to use. Now we need to make sure that we modify this a little bit as well. So what do these two entries do is that they essentially determine the text that our widgets are going to show. So again, this is localizable, so you can implement your localization system, to your different languages for your application and or your game. So in this case, this was E rank, and then the next one was D rank over here, then C rank, B rank, then A rank. Lastly, we have an S rank, and then there we go. Okay, so that's our option settings. Now, one of the important things about this is that if you do have auto detect load on profile, make sure that you update this variable, as this will be the name that we'll have to find based on the entry here. So in here, my current custom element is called wizard, which means that whenever we don't have anything saved, we want to auto load, auto detect onto our wizard element. If you have auto save disabled automatically, make sure that you also update this variable as well. And if I remember correctly, medium is called C rank, so we'll take it from there. Okay, And then other than that, we have our maximum resolution. Everything seems relatively straightforward, and then we're good to go. So from a settings perspective, we have set up our own element that we want to do over here, and that should work. And so we'll take it from there. All right, I'm going to leave input at the end because that's a little bit more complex to go over. So let's continue. Okay, so we can set up our audio here. Now, in terms of this element, at the level of 1.2, you can also save your configuration at the data asset level. And what that means here is that you no longer have to worry about setting this up specifically at the project settings. And that also means that if you want to create different configurations, you can very quickly and easily change to them. And you can also change them in runtime. So if you have like let's say a specific set of scripted events that you would like to apply, you can use these data assets to handle this information here. Okay. Generally speaking, and like with graphics, we use a name to identify this layer. So, in this case, the sound class that we're using is getting represented at the system level by master, likewise with music and random, and then you can set up the specific, pitch and volume and elements. When it comes to the data asset itself follows the same structure. So you can set up the structure as well as you want, and your configuration name. At the moment, the configuration name is not used for 1.2, but it will probably be used in the future for differentiating different elements as well. Okay, and just to keep something in mind, whenever we do load these values, if there is a data asset and there is no saved elements at the sound here, we will load the default data asset instead of this array here. So if you already have this set up from either setting up 1.0, 1.1, or 1.2, you can use this array as you need them. Game settings is a very similar setup. With 1.2, we've also introduced the concept of game data assets, and you can also modify these at runtime. They have the same exact structure as the overall other one, so this way, it gives you a bit more freedom if you have specific presets that, let's say, a given level should have, or something of the sort. Generally speaking, you can have as many profiles as you want or you may desire, and each profile has the ability of having a byte float, a byte setting, which is usually used for relatively small integers, bools, and or enumerators. You have floats, and then you have strings. So that generally gives you overall a relatively flexible framework that you can work with that covers the vast majority of the cases. When it comes to setting up in terms of sound and game settings, that's all that you really need to do with the project settings. And now let's move over into input. For this, I would really recommend taking a look at the documentation. There are a lot of concepts at play here, and I'm just going to go over them very briefly. If I wanted to do something with them, what would I do and how would I do it? So for now, the default level is that if you want to specify the entire information at the default level here, you can do so. Otherwise, you can select your own, you can create your own input profile data asset, and then that way if you want to test entirely different setups, you can do that as well. At the moment, the data asset is not swappable in runtime, so it will only take into consideration when first loading. Just keep that in mind. If there is no data asset pointer established at the project settings level, it will use the array that you have configured. Okay. Now, when it comes to visualizing and dealing with that at the widget level, we have a bind text data asset, and I'll explain what this means shortly. So what this means is that for each given entry, you can specify the text that you wanted to display. So, for instance, we have a key binding called, move forward, but at the widget level, move forward as a single word doesn't particularly look nice. So here we can establish, walk forward, and in case of axis, we have negative keys, so, for +1 and -1, and you can establish that you want the name to be, walk backward. You can also implement a category. At the moment, categories are not used, but they are meant so that if you want to group your widget rows based on category in terms of following a specific order or the like, you can do it. You can do that here. Just something for you to be able to play with. Okay. Moving next, we have our layout config data asset, and this is something that I do want to explain a little bit from the profiles. More information of this is in the documentation. So in here, you'll see that you have a profile name, which is going to be set 4, and then we have a visual configuration name, which is set to default. This configuration name is going to be linking to a layout inside your data asset if you have one specified. So, for instance, I'm going to click this one right now. And then in here, you'll see that I have 4 different layouts configured. So what this means is that my set 4 is going to be pointing towards default, and that would be this layout here. And what it says here is that this is using the data asset that uses keyboard, a keyboard configuration, and at the logical level, it's also keyboard. To kind of explain what this means is that this allows you much more control over what you want to be able for the user to be able to rebind. And let me give you like a very quick example. So let's say that your game or your application should not allow, the F1 to F12 keys to be rebound. This way, you can create a data asset that, simply has all of these entries except, let's say the F1 to F12, right? So if you wanted to remove these, you can, and that means that when the user is trying to rebind keys, it will not take, these keys into consideration. So it gives you a lot more control over how you want to do things. Furthermore, another thing that it also does is that it allows you to establish the text and value elements of them. And what I mean by this is that if we display them as how they are, it will simply show at the widget level the name of the key, which is not something that we usually want to do. Sometimes for things like mouse X or gamebyte elements, the names can get relatively convoluted, and or for more high fidelity elements we want to show, or actual maybe you have image layouts that we want to showcase instead. So this allows you to do that here. So for instance, for this setup, I'm going to be using, instead of mouse X, I'm going to be using, say, mouse horizontal, and then here I am going to be using a right side for showcasing how this works. Okay, so before we get into implementing all of this inside our own project, I just want to show the specific settings in motion. So I'm going to be opening a test map, and at the moment I am not going to save these changes, and I just want to make sure that it's still there. Okay, they are. All right, so I'm going to play, and from that I just want to set something quickly. Okay, so now we're here, and then if you check over our examples, which are the widgets that get included in 1.2, you can go to input, and then you see that from our configuration element, our mouse horizontal, instead of showing mouse X, it shows the text, and our mouse vertical, instead of showing the text or the configured text, it shows the images. And you can set how you want these priorities to be loaded at the widget level. All right, so that sets up pretty far ahead, and it gets it running to, for the most part, where we want to go. So now let's take a look into the actual widget layout and what you can do and how you can set up your elements. Before I dive too much into this, I kind of want to explain what the history of widgets have been in terms of the different layouts and what are the different purposes and how you can use them to your advantage. So initially, you can check that the 1.0 element came with a large amount of test widgets, and these were not meant to be particularly implemented at a full production level, but it showed you that if you wanted to handle everything entirely yourself, you could do that. You could ignore the entire system that we provided, and then just use the subsystems functionality to click into everything else. And it also gives you a lot of examples for if you wanted to reference this information in other systems and other actors. If you want to fetch information, apply information, you can check the vast majority of examples of how the subsystem is used inside these widgets. Then came along version 1.1, in which we abstractized the vast majority of this information away from the user, so you don't have to worry about it, but still gives you enough freedom to decide what the implementation is going to be. So for instance, if we're going to go to, let's say, gameplay page, gameplay, you're allowed to say which settings you want to add, and you have a lot more freedom of what is the specific widget that you can use for this. But it does mean that when it comes to updating things and sending things over, you do have to do a little bit of parsing yourself, but it does give you a lot more control over what you can do. Then comes 1.2, and 1.2 introduces a new concept that's called examples, and essentially this is going to be representing closer to actual implementation widgets that have been implemented to follow an incredibly specific layout and an incredibly specific subtype. Of course, for the vast majority of things, you can replace the classes, as most of these widgets will have a C++ implementation at the plugin level. So if you want to, inherit from that and then just customize your things from there, you can. Just to keep in mind that the implementation at the example levels will showcase a specific use case rather than what you can do with it, which is more focused on 1.1. Okay, so for the setup, we're going to go over and copy advanced our vertical element, since it's the thing that we want to test. And then we're going to go over here, and for now I'm not going to save this element here. And then in this element you can check everything that's getting processed, everything that's going to be getting copied over, and how all of this information works. Just in case, it's always recommended to take a look into this and take it from there. So we're going to press OK. It's going to generate everything, and this process might take a while. And then you see that we have a large amount of content created. Now, as great of a feature that advanced copy is, it is not perfect. So, for instance, if we go over into where is this game page, you will see that it has a couple of errors on just one variable. So what we'll have to do is just make sure that we get the slider element from over here, and then we replace these guys over there. Alright, and then we get this over here, and then we compile this, and then it all just works out. Okay, so now let's actually put this into test, and let's see what we can do with this. So in my test player controller, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a widget, and I am going to set it to, let's go to option over here and my vertical, and I'm going to rename it test so that I can differentiate from the others. And I'm going to go here and I'm going to call it for test, and then vertical. Okay, so then this is over here, and then I'm going to add to viewport. And there we go. All right, so if this all works, then it should be good to go. And then we're going to click all of these, and then we're going to save all. All right, save all. Does not seem to let me. There you go. Okay, so that's all of these elements saved, and that should also save these elements over here, and it does. Okay, cool. So now if we go over here, let's go over to my test map, and let's not just save for that. And then this game mode does have my pawn that's going to get spawned, and then we'll take it from here. All right, so then if I play, you'll see that at that point, everything is completed, and then elements work. If in the case of profiles, this does not show up in terms of the things that we customized, the reason for this is because in this case we did have a save pending, and I just wanted to showcase so that if you do run into this, you know where to look and what to do. So for instance, in here we see that we already had a save file that was running from my previous tests, and because it is loading that information and there is a saved element, it's not going to be loading my changes. So whenever you're changing significant elements, if you do have a save file, I do recommend deleting it. And then we're going to launch this again, and then you can see that now it's wizard as rank, and you can see that the non-custom profiles do not let you modify these elements, and then the wizard do. Okay, so far so good, and we can take it from here. So at this point, our implementation is pretty much ready to go to do whatever we want with it. And if you have any questions, let me know. You can reach me either by my email, ask a question on the marketplace page, or you can contact me by Discord at the group that's linked in the description, as well as the product page. If you have any questions, let me know, and hopefully this was useful to you. Thank you, and have a good day.